All right, good morning. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 10 today. We are continuing this study, and we're coming in this chapter to the final climactic vision of the second half of Daniel, which I'll remind you is apocalyptic in nature. And it doesn't mean we're done. We still got 2 more sermons after this one because it's going to take 3 to get through this vision that goes from chapters 10 through 12. So this is part 1 of 3 parts on this vision. We're going to call this one today the terrors we don't see, because that's what we need, more terrors, right? We've got plenty that we see every day, but this text unveils some things we don't see. It brings us to the world beyond what we see and know. We move from the natural to the supernatural, from the seen to the unseen, to the mysterious. The news felt a little bit apocalyptic this past week. When you think the news can't get any weirder, you hear about congressional hearings about UFOs, or UAPs, I guess I should call them, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Wow. I did not watch that. I just followed up on some articles about it. Really strange. You've got a former military intelligence officer turned whistleblower who's reporting on aircraft with non-human origins and the recovery of biologics. This is a former military intelligence officer reporting on those things and claiming that the government has covered it up, kept us in the dark. So wants to uncover the cover-up. That is apocalyptic. And there is an endless fascination with this kind of things that people have as human beings. We want to know what's out there. One reporter said the line into the hearing room was like the line at a Taylor Swift concert. There's just endless interest in what is out there, what is beyond the visible and the seen. Well, Daniel 10 uncovers, it unveils supernatural realities. And they are both terrifying and comforting. And I believe we need both. So we're going to look today at 3 supernatural realities uncovered in this text. A celestial being, a cosmic battle, and a cryptic book. We'll begin with a celestial being in chapter 10, verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true. And it was a great conflict. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. Okay, it's been 2 years since the events of chapter 9. Exile, this 70-year period, is effectively over. Cyrus himself, the Persian king, has commissioned the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Some of the exiles from Babylon have already returned, have gone back home. Rebuilding has just begun on the temple, but not without disappointment and opposition. So we read in verse 2, "In those days I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the 1st month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris," just pause right there and just make a note of where Daniel's at. He's still in the land of exile. That's interesting. Many have already returned and gone back. Daniel was not among them. Why? Well, just to remind you, he's in his 80s. So age might have had a good deal to do with why he's not gone back, although we don't know. But he's still in the land of exile. And he's troubled. He's mourning. He's fasting and praying about what? We don't know. It doesn't tell us. We can guess. We know that earlier visions have announced that even though exile is going to end, there's going to be prolonged hardship. So maybe he's still mourning about that. Or maybe he's got news of how the rebuilding is started. You remember Ezra chapter 3 and 4 when they laid the foundations, which is happening right at this same time, that some were, the younger people were rejoicing, and the older ones who saw how it used to be were weeping because it wasn't like it used to be. And we find Daniel here mourning. So he's there by the Tigris, says, "I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, You got to picture this. Remember, apocalyptic literature. You got to picture it. A man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl. That's a turquoise-colored gemstone. His face like the appearance of lightning. His eyes like flaming torches. His arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. And the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. It's awesome. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. For the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw the great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground. Okay, we have an awesome figure described here. Who is it? Tell you what people think. Some believe that what's happening here is this is a description of the angel who's delivering the message to Daniel. That might be. Others see it as a theophany, a manifestation of God, that this is perhaps even the pre-incarnate Christ, the coming king to whom the whole book points. The reason people say that is because of how similar the description of this figure is to the description of God and of Christ in other places. So we're not going to read this, but in Ezekiel 1, 26 through 28, there is what is very clearly a vision of God, and the description of God is very similar to what's described right here of this figure in Daniel. And it ends by saying, such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. And then you've got in Revelation, I will read this, although it's not on the screen, Revelation 1, 13 through 15, a description of Christ. Notice how similar it sounds to what we just read about this awesome figure. One like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like the white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. Okay, so either it's a description of the angel, or this is a manifestation of God. What are we to conclude? I don't know. The text doesn't say, so I'm not going to, okay? What I think is really important to see is this figure is exceptionally awesome. The description stands out not just in the book of Daniel, but in Scripture. This is an exceptionally awesome figure. I believe whoever the figure is meant to convey a sense of God's majesty and splendor, something of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. And did you notice the effect this awesome figure had? It was terrifying. Daniel's companions, you notice there he wasn't alone. Others were with him. Look at verse 7. I'm going to put it up here in the New Living Translation. I like the way they capture a couple of verses here. Only I, Daniel, saw this vision. The men with me saw nothing, but they were suddenly terrified and ran away to hide. The ESV says a great trembling fell upon them. They were terrified. They ran away. And they didn't even see anything. They didn't even see the vision. And they're terrified. Daniel, verse 8, so I was left there all alone to see this amazing vision. My strength left me. My face grew deathly pale. And I felt very weak. Then I heard the man speak. And when I heard the sound of his voice, I fainted and lay there with my face to the ground. This awesome figure was so awesome that it knocked him out. He's unconscious because of this great emotional distress. Now, I've not fainted yet, but I've had moments where I was close. I remember a time when my cousin was really severely injured. It broke I don't know how many bones in his body in an accident. And when I went to visit him in the hospital shortly after it happened, somebody bumped into his bed, and you just visibly see the pain that he's in. And I remember having to go lean against the wall because I felt like I'm going to pass out. There's great emotional distress, such intensity in seeing the awesomeness of this figure that he passes out, knocked unconscious. First, we get unveiled an awesome figure that terrifies, an unseen terror. Then we have a cosmic battle. Now, at this point, starting in verse 10, there's this heavenly messenger who's interacting with Daniel, and this is where it's not clear if this is the being, that awesome figure, or if this is an angelic messenger who's conveying a message. So it's not real clear. It doesn't make a lot of difference. There is a message from heaven that's coming to Daniel in this interaction. So Daniel is passed out on his face. Let's look at verse 10. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, we've seen that before, treasured. Understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up, trembling. Then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia. And I came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. Okay, this is one of the strangest accounts in the Bible. It gives us a brief, tantalizing glimpse of this unseen angelic conflict. And we're introduced to this figure, Michael. Michael is the other named angel in the Bible. Two named angels in the Bible, both of them we encounter in the book of Daniel, Gabriel and Michael. He's here called the chief prince. We read about him in the New Testament. He's called an archangel or a chief angel. When you get to chapter 12 of Daniel, he's referred to as the great prince who has charge of your people. So Michael is typically regarded as the protector of God's people, this chief angel in charge of protecting God's people. This is a pretty remarkable figure. This is a mighty angel. When we read about him in Jude 1:9 and Revelation 12:7, he's contending with the devil himself and leading an angelic army at war in heaven. So we have Michael, this chief prince, and then we've got this prince of the kingdom of Persia. Who's that? This is a spiritual opposition in the heavenly places. This is not a human person. This is spiritual opposition in the heavenly places. A spiritual person, a spiritual being that has some level of power or influence in the earthly Persian kingdom. So this passage is uncovering or revealing warring powers in the heavenly realms, in the spiritual realm. And it's somehow related in a mysterious way to this world, to the real world. So you've got Daniel in what we would call the real world, praying and mourning and fasting. And then in the spiritual realm, which is unseen but real, there's spiritual battle, supernatural opposition, such that it has somehow delayed the answer coming to Daniel. So they're related in some way. And if that is kind of baffling to you, it is to me too, and it was to Daniel as well. It had what I'm going to call a dumbfounding effect on him. Look at verse 15. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and was mute. So first he faints, then he's left speechless. So this second unveiling is of angelic conflict that dumbfounds. And we haven't even got to the main part of the vision. This is almost what some have called an introduction to the vision. And already he's passed out and speechless. Now, I want to just kind of pause the flow of thought for a minute and say something about this subject that this chapter brings up of spiritual warfare. When you read a chapter like this and you're reading about things that are going on in unseen realms and it's somehow tied to how we pray or what's going on with our prayer life, there's a lot of speculation that happens. And I want to be really careful not to speculate. But I also don't want to be dismissive of the concept of spiritual warfare either. Some people have taken Daniel chapter 10 and they've derived a whole strategy for spiritual warfare on this chapter. I think that's the wrong approach, although I think there are some things we can learn. It's just not what I'm going to focus on today. But I do want to stress that there is an ongoing battle, and it's somehow related to us. Like, we are involved in it. This is clearly stated in the New Testament. Ephesians 6, 10 through 12 talks about being strong in the Lord, strengthened in his might, putting on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. And then he says, remember this, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Saying there's an ongoing battle. Somehow we are involved in the wrestling of it, but it's not with human beings. It's this battle that's going on in the unseen realm. Now, anytime you talk about this unseen world, angels, demons, all of this kind of thing, that is increasingly dismissed in today's culture. There's a new Gallup poll that just came out, I think last Thursday. Did not have any surprising news. It says Americans' belief in God, the devil, and other spiritual entities such as angels, demons, heaven, hell, has fallen to a new low. Okay, that's no surprise, right? In America today, belief in the supernatural elements that the Bible presents to us, belief in that is at a new low, the lowest it's been in 2 decades. At the same time, and this is going back a little bit in Gallup's polls to about 2021, belief that UFOs as alien aircraft is on the rise. That's 2 years ago, but it's even greater now, no doubt. So at the same time that we are more prone to believe there are aliens out there, we are less inclined to believe that there is a God, that there are angels and demons in heaven and hell. I think it's really fascinating that we know as people, we have this sense there's more out there, but how quick as a society we are to dismiss what the Bible is saying is actually out there. It's unseen reality, but it's reality. We have a real and powerful, non-human opposition that should concern us a lot more than aliens. We should be more alert to spiritual opposition that is real and unseen than we are to aliens or any other threat we face in this world. Okay, on this topic, there's helpful wisdom from C.S. Lewis in his preface to the Screwtape Letters. C.S. Lewis, not inspired, not a biblical author, but quoted just about as much. He does have some helpful things to say on this topic in Screwtape Letters. He says this: there are 2 equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. I think that's helpful. Okay? And so I don't want to speculate too much, but I don't want to dismiss either. I think it's important we recognize there's unseen, powerful spiritual opposition. We should be alert to it and engaged in the battle. But I don't think we need to go down get overly obsessed with that, see a demon behind every bush and that sort of thing. I think reading this is meant to give us great confidence in God, even though there's a battle that is stronger than we are. So brief glimpse encourages us to be spiritually alert and engaged. Okay, let's look at this third supernatural reality that is unveiled. The Cryptic Book. Now, I'm using the word cryptic because obviously it starts with a letter C. I don't know why. It's just a thing, preachers, we just have to do it. Actually, it's not just because of that, though. The book that is unveiled here, there's an element of hidden meaning to it. There's an unveiling, an uncovering of what was previously covered, and it's puzzling, it's perplexing. It's not going to make perfect sense until you can look back on it. We're going to talk more about that later, but let's read beginning in verse 16. And behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man, greatly loved, fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I've come to you? But now I would return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. And this is kind of a parenthetical statement. I tie it to verse 1 because I think this is what makes verse 1 of chapter 11, I think belongs with this thought. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So he's saying, this messenger is saying, Michael stands by me, and in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood and strengthened him. Okay, I know that raises a lot of questions. This book of truth is an apocalyptic message that strengthens. This is the reason the messenger came to Daniel. That's why this whole chapter is called an introduction. Because the messenger came to tell him what was inscribed in the book of truth. And that book of truth is going to be revelatory. It's going to be apocalyptic. It's unveiling and unfolding. That is the contents of mostly chapter 11 and into chapter 12. So we're going to talk about that cryptic book, the book of truth, in the coming sermons. So I'm not going to say much about that right now. I will say this. It puzzles Daniel and it strengthens him. It's meant to help him stand. So we're gonna look at that in the next two sermons, but I want to notice right now that even in this passage, and actually what we just read ties some things together that we've read throughout this chapter about strengthening. You notice that Daniel is weakened repeatedly and strengthened repeatedly. One writer called it celestial first aid that Daniel is experiencing. Let me just put it up here and note it for a moment, okay? Verses 8 and 9, Daniel grew pale and fainted. And twice it underlines that he had no strength. Then in verses 10 and 11, the angel, in a two-step touch and word, gave him the strength to get up. So he faints, and then this messenger touches him. He gets up on his knees, speaks a word to him. Then he's able to stand. He's strengthened. Then it's repeated in verse 15. Daniel, weakened, was unable to speak, completely dumbfounded, unable to continue any further. And we hadn't even got to the main part of the vision, and he's totally undone, can't do any more. Verse 16, the angel touched his lips so that he opened his mouth and spoke. Then again, verses 16 and 17, Daniel was pained, weak, and breathless. And twice it says he had no strength. Verse 18, the angel touched him and strengthened him again. You get this repetition in there. He's weakened, and then he's strengthened. And then in verse 19, which I think is really the heart of it, and it's what I hope we'll most hear today. And he said, O man greatly loved, fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. So when I study a passage, and I'm just going to leave that up there for a minute, I always try to ask, what's the force of the passage? What's the main thing that's coming through that I'm supposed to take away when I read this? And it's interesting seeing what other people do with this. Is this chapter meant to explain what's going on when our prayers are delayed, when they're not answered? Is that what it's here for? Is it meant to encourage us in prayer and fasting? Is it supposed to teach us why prayer and fasting matters? Is it about understanding spiritual warfare? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of those things in there that we could take from it and make some application to, but I don't think that's the force of the passage. The force of the passage is to strengthen us. It's a strengthening encounter. It's a strengthening passage. And we need strengthened. Each of us have battles. We have battles that we're going through right now. Each one of us have things we're worried about, things that we're afraid of. We have griefs, we have troubles, we have all kinds of things that are pressing on us this morning. And I kind of like that we don't know what Daniel was mourning about. I kind of like that we don't know. Because I think it invites us to say, well, I've got my own concerns. I've got my own troubles. I've got my own griefs. I've got this thing that I'm really concerned about. And it allows this passage to bear on our concerns and our battles. So how does it do that? Well, there's a couple of ways it does it. One is what writer John Bloom calls a fear transfer. I like this concept, a fear transfer. A fear transfer is when your focus is shifted from your fears, your worries, your concerns, your anxieties, to a greater fear. Okay, that's a fear transfer. When you shift your focus from what you're presently afraid of to a greater fear. Before Daniel could be comforted, he had to be terrified. That's fascinating to me in this whole passage in chapter 10 through 12. All of it is meant to strengthen Daniel. But before he's strengthened, he's terrified and brought to his knees, in fact, all the way to being passed out. Why? He needed a fear transfer. This is what's happening in Mark chapter 4. Remember the disciples were with Jesus in the boat, and there's this great storm, and these seasoned sailors are suddenly afraid, and they think that Jesus doesn't care because he's sleeping in the boat, and they wake him up, and he stills the storm. Do you remember what it says after he stilled the storm? They were filled with a great fear. Mark is making the point that they were more afraid after than they were before the storm was stilled, because they figured out the one in the boat with them was more fearsome than the storm on the outside. It's a fear transfer. 1 minute they're afraid of the storm, then they see who's really in the boat with them, and suddenly the storm is not nearly as big. This passage invites us to see with eyes of faith the unseen reality of the God before whom every knee ultimately bows. It puts before us this awesome figure in the likeness of the glory of Yahweh. It says, you need to remember there's an unseen reality of a God who, if you could see him, it would knock you out. That's why we cultivate the fear of the Lord. That's why I think worship helps us even, and think about how to say this. This is why worship helps us even when sermons don't. Okay, I gotta be careful how I say that, okay? Because even if I don't speak in a way that connects to you, there's something about when we gather together and we exalt God together. We are remembering this unseen reality of a mighty, holy, everlasting, unchanging God who is sovereign and on his throne, who is all wise. And our problems and troubles are small by comparison. We cultivate the fear of the Lord. That's the way we face our fears, by remembering what an awesome God we serve. And this is a God we can trust. This is a God who loves him. So this text gives us a fear transfer. It also gives us a battlefield report. You notice in there it's telling us about this unseen battle with these cosmic powers. And if you're Daniel, you realize there's an unseen hero who fights for you. Daniel is looking at the way he sees the world, and he's mourning and fasting, and this messenger comes and says, don't you know Michael, the protector of God's people, the chief angel, fights for you? Don't you know you've got resources in heaven? Don't you know there's an ongoing battle that you can't see that is for you? The battle is bigger than you see. The enemy is greater than you see. The conflict is too much for you. But God's got resources fighting for you. New Testament gives us some perspective on this. And again, I think the New Testament encourages us to be engaged in the battle, to wrestle. But primarily, the New Testament is not about telling us how to defeat the enemy. It's telling us about the one who has defeated the enemy. It's about the hero of all the Scriptures. It's about the one, as we talked about in communion today, who is superior to angels, even to Michael. Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of God. God himself in the person of Jesus, the world's true hero. That's what the gospel is. It's a battle report, isn't it? It's an announcement of victory won. It's an announcement of the great hero of Scriptures, God himself in the person of Jesus, who has defeated the enemy. When we tell each other the gospel, we're just reminding ourselves of what is true. That the ultimate threat, the one that's greater than anything we face, the threat that is the source of all that we face, sin, death, and the powers of evil, the ultimate threat has already been defeated at the cross. A blow has been dealt to the enemy from which the enemy will not recover. So we take heart. Colossians 2:15 talks about the cross this way, and it's like bringing the unseen and the seen world together, because when we look at the cross, we see a man crucified, and it looks like defeat. But Paul says, oh, no, there's more going on there. Remember, you've got an unseen enemy, rulers and principalities and powers. You've got cosmic powers that are the real enemy. Well, there's a lot more going on the cross, because what's happening in the unseen world, Colossians 2:15 says this, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. With your eyes, it looks like defeat, but pull back the curtain. Look at what's happening in that unseen world on that battlefield, and it is the victory of victories. So, oh man, or woman, or girl, or boy, greatly loved, fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. You've got a mighty God, and the battle is won. If you are here today and you have not put your faith in that conquering King and the triumph that he accomplished at the cross and been baptized into him, or if you're just going through something tough and you need your church family to join with you and pray, there is an unseen reality and an awesome God who hears prayer. I invite you to come. We'll pray together with you. So if you need to, come to the front while we stand and sing.